Good morning, everyone. My name is Walter Brewster. I'm the Senior Vice President of the Better Business Bureau. And we are very fortunate to have this outstanding team here. They are from the law firm Venable, LLP, and they're going to present a workshop that is entitled Protecting Your Nonprofit's Money in the Post-Madoff Era. Got to be topical, if nothing else. So I certainly want to hear this. Let me quickly introduce the panelists. There's detailed bios in your kits, and I'm just going to hit a couple of highlights. Jeffrey Tenenbaum is a partner at Venable and the chair of the nonprofit organization's practice group there. He's also chair of the firm's credit counseling and debt services industry practice group. He's a leading nonprofit attorney, frequently speaks and writes about legal matters in the philanthropic world. He's got a wide range of expertise, far too many awards to bother with listing here, and we'd be here all day. He started out, as I understand it, at the American Society of Association Executives, and he's still active with that organization. Rory Cohen is also a partner at Venable and has extensive financial experience. He comes from Bear Stearns a while back. That might be interesting too. And Doreen Martin is an associate with Venable, expertise particularly in white-collar crime and corporate investigation. She comes out of the city's DA's office. So one thing I want to remind you all at the end, please do fill out your evaluation when the workshop is over. It helps us a lot. And now, let's do it.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. We are very fortunate to have with us today two really distinguished members of our firm who practice frequently with our nonprofit organization clients in interesting ways. And the topic of today's program, it's really a two-part program. There's obviously a common theme here, as reflected by the title, Protecting Your Nonprofit's Money in the Post-Madoff Era. But it really is a program that's twofold. The first part of our program is going to teach you kind of some practical tips and suggestions about preventing embezzlement in your nonprofit organization. And Doreen is going to lead that discussion. The second part of our discussion, which Rory is going to lead, is going to deal with due diligence considerations for nonprofit investment fiduciaries. Both are very kind of different and distinct topics, but obviously there's a common theme there. And I think you're going to find both topics very interesting. Just to let you know what you have in your handout materials there in front of you, there's a copy of the PowerPoint presentation itself. And there are also a number of articles by Rory, by Doreen, and other members of our firm that should provide you with some helpful background. And then there's also some background about our firm's practice areas in the nonprofit area and otherwise. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Doreen to get us started. Thanks.
Good morning. This presentation is based on an article that Jeff Tenenbaum and Widge Devaney, another partner in our firm, wrote. Widge cannot be here today because he is actually in Iraq investigating a case of employee embezzlement for one of our clients. So I'm here and I'm going to give the presentation for him. There are stories in the newspaper and on the news all the time about embezzlement from organizations. And I'm going to go through some recent cases that you might have heard about in the news. The first one, in September, the House of Ruth, the bookkeeper and office manager, was sentenced to a year in prison. She had pled guilty to federal charges of misappropriating $138,000 in federal funds and embezzling $238,000 from the organization's bank accounts. In another case, the CFO of the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies pled guilty to wire fraud. She was a 10-year employee who worked her way up to CFO, and she used the organization's credit cards to charge about $184,000 in personal expenses, including hair and makeup and casino charges. Another case from the Oklahoma CASA Association, an employee, actually the executive director, was sentenced to 15 years in prison after she pled guilty to embezzling $550,000. She too was a longtime employee, and she had used the organization's credit cards for personal expenses such as foreign vacations, cosmetic surgery, and paying for college tuition. So when does employee fraud occur? There are three main factors. Criminologists have identified three elements that are often present when fraud occurs. They are opportunity, motivation, and rationalization. What is motivation? Motivation usually is pressure. It's pressure that causes a person to commit a fraud. Pressure can include almost anything from medical bills, expensive tastes, addiction problems coming from gambling debts or drug debts. Most of the time, pressure comes from a very significant, specific source. And usually the person feels that they need to fix that problem in secret, and that's why they often commit fraud. Sometimes the motivation is pure greed. It's that simple. There's no other motivating factor. The second element that criminologists have identified is opportunity. And opportunity is the element that the organization actually can control. It refers to situations and circumstances that make it possible for the fraud to take place. If you eliminate or reduce a person's opportunity, you will eliminate or reduce the chance of them actually committing a fraud. The third factor is rationalization. This refers to the need for employees to somehow justify their fraudulent actions in their own minds. A person involved in a fraud usually tries to put the blame on someone else. They shift the blame from themselves to another person. There are three common rationalizations, and they are entitlement, anger or revenge, and minimization. Entitlement is when someone says, the organization doesn't pay me enough, or in some circumstances at all. So I have this money coming to me. It's, I should be paid this, or I should get this money. Anger and revenge is when they say the organization treated me poorly. They didn't do right by me, and so now they're going to get it. Minimization is when they're saying to themselves, I'm not taking very much, or I'm taking, but the company won't notice it, or I'm taking and I'm going to repay it. Oftentimes, fraud examiners will come in, and the first thing they do when they talk to a witness or a person who's been accused of committing a fraud is they say, where are your notes? Because usually a person has an intention to repay the money that they're stealing, and they take detailed notes so that they can actually put the money back and cover their tracks so that they hope they don't get caught. And certain times they'll say, yep, right in my top drawers where all the notes are, laying out the fraud. The next step is, why are nonprofits frequently the victims of embezzlement? So have you ever heard someone, or have you ever said, Mrs. X is the most dedicated, honest, trustworthy person that I've ever met? Or what about, everyone who works here is a really good person and they're looking to do the right thing? Or, we don't have enough staff to have financial controls, but our annual audit will catch any fraud that might be occurring. In nonprofit organizations, the management and board tend to be more trusting than in for-profit organizations. Usually the people are there, they're volunteers, or if they're working, they're there to do a common good. There's also looser financial controls than in nonprofits than there are in for-profit businesses. And there's this underlying belief that a fraud will be detected because we might have, during the audit, it will be detected. So what can you do to prevent embezzlement? There's 10 easy steps, and this is what we're going to talk about, are the steps that you can take to prevent fraud from occurring. And they're common steps, very common sense steps, that you can take that will eliminate or at least reduce the chances of fraud being committed at your organization. The first thing is you need to set the tone. The ethical tone of the organization is set by the top executives in your office, and it filters throughout the organization. One of the most important elements of fraud protection is to establish a code of ethics. You need to establish this code of ethics, and you need to stay committed to the code of ethics. And it should be clearly delivered to all of the employees at the organization in writing. You should have new hires sign the code of ethics, review the code of ethics, and make it part of any training courses you have for new hires. Also, it's important that when employees move up in rank or move up in positions or take on new responsibilities, that they get a refresher training in the code of ethics so that they're constantly reminded that there is a code of ethics and the company or the organization is serious about the code of ethics. You have to remember that if you have a reputation for aggressively investigating fraud and for aggressively standing by your code of ethics, you'll have less chance of fraud being committed within the organization. If you ignore it or you don't have a strong code of ethics, then you have a likelihood it's an open invitation for fraud to occur. The second step is to conduct background investigations. Many organizations skip this very basic step. The Association of Certified Fraud Examiners reports that 7% of embezzlers have been convicted of a previous crime. So the background checks will tell you if a person has been convicted of a crime before you hire them. And sometimes the background checks will not detect if a person has been arrested but never convicted, but you can easily go on Google and type the person's name on Google, and you can see if there's, police blotters have arrests. So a person may not have been convicted but may have been arrested of a crime, and you want to know this information before you hire them. The screening process should also include a credit check, and this is especially true if you're hiring a person to handle your financial controls or to have if they have any financial responsibility. You should know if a person is able to manage their own finances before you ask them to manage the organization's finances, and you can easily see this in a credit check. The employment screening costs about $100. It's not that expensive, but it's well worth it. In a large nonprofit, the treasurer of the organization embezzled $2.2 million because the organization never did a background check. When they received the treasurer's resume, it indicated that the treasurer had graduated from a very prestigious university and had received a degree in economics. After the embezzlement was discovered and $2.2 million was missing, they actually looked at the resume and verified the resume after this money was taken, and she never graduated from any university and had no degree in economics. Had they taken that simple step, paid $100 to do a background check, they could have avoided missing the $2.2 million. You really need to know who you are hiring before you hire them, and these are easy steps to take. Check the education, verify that they graduated from where they said they graduated from, they received a degree that they said they received, check prior employment, check references. That's why we ask for references. Actually call the person listed as a reference, and find out if they are what their reputation is. Also look at gaps in resumes. That's another indicator. You should not ignore any types of 2 or 3 year gaps. You want to know what the person was doing in those gaps. The third step is very important. It's double signatures and authorizations. Multiple layers of approval will make it far more difficult for embezzlers to steal from your organization. It won't prevent forgery, but it will make it more difficult for anyone who's looking to commit forgery to do it, because instead of one signature, they have to forge 2 signatures. So for any expenditures over a predetermined amount, $200, $500, the organization, let the organization set it, require that there's 2 signatures on every check and 2 authorizations on every cash disbursement. If your organization is too small to do that, to have that multiple layer, consider having an officer or a director be the second signatory on the checks. If you're using credit cards, require prior written approval for costs estimated to exceed a certain amount. Make sure that they're getting the approval before they use the card. And also make sure that the person using the card isn't the same person who is approving the payment of the payments that are being put on the card. Have a board member or a person review the credit card statements and the expense reports of the CFO, the executive director, and the CEO. That way, there's a system of checks and balances there. When you're looking at expense reports, this is an area where a lot of people, small amounts, but there's a lot of money taken through this. These three areas where the expense accounts are used to steal money. The first one is mischaracterization of expenses. Oftentimes, employees will take out their friends or family members to nice dinners and try to pass it off as a legitimate business expense. You need to know what the dinner is for and make sure that it is a legitimate business purpose. Another area is when people overstate their expenses. A common scheme is to get blank taxi receipts, and on the taxi receipt put down a cost for the ride that is more than the actual cost. And the way to avoid this or prevent this is compare receipts. If there's 2 people traveling together, or if 2 people are traveling, maybe they go separately. Make sure you compare the receipts to see what each person is charging, and they should be consistent. Another thing is altered receipts. Sometimes people will look at the receipt that they've used from a while ago, change the date, and submit that. You want to be looking to make sure you have original receipts before you pay on them. The 4th step this goes with the receipts, is to require backup documentation. All check and cash disbursements must be accompanied by an invoice showing that the payment is actually justified. If possible, the invoices or disbursement requests should be authorized by a manager who will not be the one signing the checks. You're going to hear this throughout, that you need the double, segregation of duties. Only pay from original invoices. With technology today, it's very easy to create made-up invoices and submit it. You want to see an original invoice. The 5th step is to never pre-sign checks. Many nonprofits do this. If someone's going on vacation, if they're going to be away at a conference for a week or 2, they'll pre-sign checks and leave it with someone. That's just, don't do it. That's an open invitation for fraud. Also keep blank check stocks and signature stamps locked up. There's one case example where the executive director gave his signature stamp to his assistant, and the assistant stole millions of dollars because she wrote checks herself and used the signature stamp, and it went undetected for years. So you need to keep the check stocks locked up, and the signature stamps should always be with the person whose stamp it is. The next step is segregation of duties. This is the key to stopping embezzlement, is implementing a dual control system. And I've said this before, it's the dual control systems require the authorization or approval of 2 individuals to complete a transaction. It's that simple. One individual should not be responsible for an entire financial transaction from beginning to the end. Many small companies fall into this trap of having one bookkeeper handle all the accounts payables and accounts receivables and write and sign and deliver the checks. The dual control system puts a second set of eyes on the transaction and greatly reduces the risk of embezzlement. If the organization, again, does not have enough staff to segregate these duties, a board director or officer should reconcile the bank and credit card statements. In a case example that we have, the former vice president of a large national nonprofit organization embezzled $11.9 million from the organization. The vice president, who worked for the company for 20 years, was not a criminal mastermind. She simply wrote checks to herself, forging the signatures of the required co-signers, and then destroyed the checks when the bank mailed them back to her. No one noticed this because she was the person who kept the organization's books. She was able to cover up for the losses by inflating the reported amount of pledges that went unfulfilled. And this, again, this wasn't an elaborate scheme. This was a case of an organization with a small number of staff members putting too much trust into one individual. Had someone else reconciled the bank statements, she would not have been able to destroy the bank checks that she had written to herself, and they would have been able to catch her. Another good idea is to require employees who hold any financial positions, require them to take uninterrupted 2-week vacations. This will permit the transactions to clear properly within the system. And after 2 weeks, if something goes wrong, you may know that there's a problem there. So it's good. And be wary if someone doesn't want to take a vacation and wants to control it. Usually it's for a reason that they need to control it in order to make things run smoothly. The next step is fair bidding process. All contracts should be subject to at least 3 bids and approved by a manager uninvolved in the transaction. This will prevent employees from receiving kickbacks from the vendor for being awarded the contract. Also, large contracts should be reviewed and voted on by the board. There's also a common fraud, which is a ghost vendor, an employee who has the ability to approve new contracts and also make the payments to the vendors. They occasionally will set up a vendor account that's controlled by them, and they will send payments into the account, and that's how they embezzle money out of the company. You need to have that segregation of duties in order to prevent that from happening. The next step is to fixed asset inventories. Always conduct a fixed asset inventory at least once a year. Record serial numbers of the equipment and consider engraving the numbers onto the actual equipment. Another common fraud that people do is they use the organization's express mail accounts to ship packages. It's not a lot of money, but they use it to ship packages to people, to relatives. It's not a legitimate business expense. You need to watch out for those. The next one is always have audits and board level oversight. External audits can be helpful in ensuring that the fraud prevention measures are being followed and that they are effective. Beware, though, that a typical audit will not be, you can't rely on a typical audit to detect fraud. And finally, the 10th step is to encourage whistleblowers. You need to provide an anonymous form of communication. Employees may not report theft or mismanagement if they believe that their jobs are in jeopardy. Employees must have a manner in which to contact a board officer in the event something needs to be reported. So you must be prepared to take these reports seriously and make sure that you investigate and go forward and make sure that whatever the fraud is, you try to resolve it by enforcing the code of ethics and by instituting some of these controls. Those were the 10 steps, and Rory is going to present the next topic. Thank you.
And just hold on to your questions for the end, and we'll take questions on both topics after Rory's finished speaking.
So thank you guys for coming out on such a beautiful day to listen to us speak. I think as Doreen kind of puts it, it sort of puts a weird twist on the moniker on our badge that says starts with trust, but that's really, the issue with some of the nonprofits where you have, people who've been there a very long time that you sort of let them run by themselves, operate by themselves, and, fail to review their activities from time to time. That's the kind of environment where fraud can really occur. So the issue that I'd like to discuss is, Doreen was talking about preventing loss of money through theft. I'm going to talk about really preventing or attempting to prevent or getting better control over the depletion of assets through the investment function. And the investment function of many nonprofits probably takes on a whole new meaning or stature in today's day and age, where the markets are, for better part, or maybe in the best case scenario, trading sideways. The ability to raise assets in today's economy is becoming much more challenging, and the oversight and review of the role and function of the board of directors by attorneys generals is becoming much greater. So I think that the ability to pay more attention to the investment function, and I'll talk about later some of the considerations and the ability to document it and reflect a reasonable approach is becoming increasingly more important. Just a little bit more background on myself. My practice historically is focused on asset management, private funds, separate account management. In my prior life, when I was at Bear Stearns, among those different activities, I supervised the RAP fee programs. I'm not sure the size of your organizations, but many nonprofits, especially the smaller ones, will tend to use larger financial service firms to help them, consult with them, and make decisions in connection with their investment function. And I've drafted many of the agreements and have a good sense of what they mean from the part of the financial service firm, but also on the part of the nonprofit. We'll get into a little bit more detail about that as well. I also spent a great deal of time advising due diligence committees, both those that reviewed the activities of managers, those who reviewed the activities of consultants, and those that reviewed private investment funds, hedge funds, and private equity funds to make available to the through the financial service firm. So some of the considerations that I've outlined at the end are based on my experience, both from a practical standpoint, understanding operational due diligence, but also from a legal standpoint and understanding the legal requirements that registered investment advisors are subject to. And if you're going to be conducting operational and regulatory due diligence, it puts you in a position to know the kind of documents that they should be in a position to provide you. So with that, I'll sort of get this. Where does the obligation arise from? There's statutory guidance, and I put forth here. There are a number of uniform statutes. Each of the various states can adopt or a portion of some of the uniform statutes. There currently is Uniform Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act, which is the most current uniform statute related to the investment of nonprofit endowments and investment funds. This superseded the Uniform Management of Institutional Funds Act. Many states have adopted a substantial part of MIFA. Some states, like New York, currently follow UMIFA, though New York has, again, also basically proposed it to the legislature to try to revise their investment statute. I think that what I'd like to do is just contrast a little bit between UPMIFA and UMIFA, which I think from the nonprofit investment fiduciary, it helps define and outline some very critical factors to consider. I think UPMIFA actually provides very specific guidance of common sense, more common factors that are used by investment fiduciaries. So when if you're ever in a position to try to justify that you've discharged your fiduciary responsibilities, it'll give you a number of factors to consider. Just a little bit background on UPMIFA. As talked about, it modernized UMIFA. It made much more clear that the standard is one of prudence, and I think they incorporated that into the statute to reflect the prudent standard. It also sought to incorporate many of the provisions of the act that applied to trustees. So we refer here to the Uniform Prudent Investors Act, as I'll get into in a little bit. Some of the factors that they talk about and considerations considering the investment function are derived from the Uniform Prudent Investor Act. It also intended to try to harmonize the standards, where you might have a board of directors of the nonprofit corporation versus trustees of a trust. I think historically, you have a lot more guidance on, what would constitute prudent activity, reasonable behavior on the part of a trustee, and what this statute or the Uniform Statute of MIFID attempted to do is incorporate many of these standards that were already discussed in great detail and are widely accepted in the case of trustees. So just to set forth, some of the fiduciary responsibilities. So when you're defining the role of the investment fiduciary, clearly, and I think most people widely accept that they have a duty of loyalty to the nonprofit corporation, they have a duty of care to the nonprofit corporation, they have a duty to minimize costs, and a couple of pages later we talk about the duty to diversify. But what does this all mean in the context of the nonprofit corporation? Can you direct investments to other entities in which you might have interest in? I don't think it's explicitly prohibited that you do that, but clearly there's a disclosure issue that you might have to the board or the investment committee that you have an investment interest. If you look at what's happening in today's world with the Attorney General currently asserting certain allegations by a very well-recognized fiduciary out there, it was a situation where this fiduciary owned a number of feeder funds that they had an indirect interest in, but failed to fully disclose the nature of that interest to the nonprofit board. So one way to try to avoid that is to have a conflicts policy to prohibit that type of investment. The other way is to have a very explicit conflicts policy that requires disclosure of all of your conflicts of interest, and then try to evaluate it and have the board make an independent reasoned judgment and decision whether or not to make that investment. The duty of care, as we talked about, clearly you have to be a prudent investor. You have to use a reasonable care, skill, caution, and an approach that a fiduciary of a similarly situated fiduciary would use for a nonprofit corporation. So I highlight two components there. The first is a similarly situated fiduciary. Okay, and the second is a nonprofit corporation. So the first is that a nonprofit corporation has a mission. So in the context of the investment function, you have to have a reasonable idea of the type of allocations you're going to need, the type of investments you're going to have to make, or the expenditures that the nonprofit are going to agree to, and understanding the spending policy and understanding the rate of growth and understanding the mission when thinking about your investment policy and thinking about an attainable rate of growth and the type of risk that the endowment should assume. You need to consider what the mission is, what the rate of growth is. If it's a very modest, if you have modest allocations, you might take more of a conservative approach. If it's pretty fairly aggressive expenditure program, like it's been reported, a number of institutions, a number of educational institutions like Harvard and Yale had very aggressive capital expenditures where they were building a number of buildings and paying the professors a lot of money. They needed to support the building with the growth of their underlying endowments. They took some fairly aggressive approaches, and some achieved far fewer rates of growth than they had anticipated, so they then had to go back in and analyze again and stop some of their spending. So reduce some of the resources, and there are different ways to go about doing it, whether or not you cut professors or whether or not you reduce building. And these are some of the real issues they face. On the other hand, you have to think about a similarly situated nonprofit. So what does that mean? What's the size of your nonprofit? What are the resources of your nonprofit? What are the number of employees of your nonprofit versus some of the other nonprofits? Very large nonprofits probably have a lot of money to allocate towards an investment committee and people dedicated toward the investment committee. They may be able to hire outside consultants, a number of outside consultants, to do specific due diligence on underlying projects and underlying investments. The question we often get is, what if you're a smaller nonprofit? Okay, you few people, very small board of directors. We don't have resources to hire outside professionals to come advise our investment committee. We don't have we don't have sufficient resources to hire individuals to conduct due diligence. So what do? What can we invest in? And I think that when you think about that, and I'll sort of like give you a little anecdote. We had a question from a smaller nonprofit that was investing in hedge funds. Everybody invested in hedge funds. It was the thing to do, right? Everyone's talking about, newspapers are reporting, you get better risk-adjusted return with alternative investment vehicles. You get the ability for asset managers to generate alpha, which is, in other words, the ability to outperform their index. okay, by having the ability in a private investment vehicle to short, to basically borrow and lend out their securities, take short positions on some of the underlying stocks. Supposedly that would make them more nimble. They should be able to outperform the index versus a mutual fund that faces limitations under the Investment Company Act as to the type of leverage it can have and the type of investments they can make. So in the last 10 years, up to mid-2008, everybody was buying hedge funds. Good thing to do. And so we got a question from a member of the board of directors that says, well, what do we do if we can't hire an outside consultant? Because we said to them, you need to understand what you're investing in. And those are very complicated products. They have very lengthy offering documents. They have extensive risk disclosure in those documents. And if you're signing those documents, you need to understand what you're investing in. And they were like, well, we don't have the time to do that. And we said, well, then you shouldn't be investing in hedge funds. So, to sort of tie it all together, when you talk about similarly situated nonprofits, if you're very small and you don't have the resources, you can't bring outside individuals with a certain level of sophistication, investment sophistication, to analyze certain investments, we should be making those investments. So, that we talk about, reasonable care. Good faith and with the care of an ordinarily prudent person. If just going real quickly, we talk about prudent decision making. UpMIFA actually sets forth these factors as guidance, very precise guidance of the type of things that an investment fiduciary should think about when assessing, constructing the portfolio, and assessing the reasonableness of making an investment. The New York statute has a very general standard. Okay, it talks about prudence. Okay, but the New York statute doesn't give this kind of guidance. So I think it's very helpful when thinking about the things you should think about as an investment fiduciary to look to UpMIFA and these type of these various factors when making investment decisions. So the first is, I think some of them are fairly obvious, but the general economic conditions, the possible effects of inflation and deflation. So if part of your investments are going to be related to fixed assets or private assets like real estate or private equity, you need to think about the general economic conditions. If you're going to invest in private equity, we're looking at a situation where you're going to be locked up for 7 to 10 years. Is there a public market where this private equity fund might be able to exit and bring some of their underlying companies to market? What are your needs? What are your cash needs? How much do you need now to fund some of your commitments already? Can you afford to be illiquid for an extended period of time? You talk about the role that each investment or course of action plays within the overall investment portfolio of the fund. I think this is very critical because that point right there talks about modern portfolio theory. I think in the old age, people used to look at each investment by itself to see whether or not that investment was a suitable investment. But because different investments are correlated to each other in different ways, financial analysis has evolved over time such that it's much more acceptable to think about the role of an investment in the context of the entire portfolio. So people talk about hedging their exposure, or people talk about gaining exposure to different types of asset classes, or people talk about the mix between fixed income assets and equity assets. I think it is now appropriate to think about each investment and its effect and its impact in the context of the entire portfolio. Working down some of these a little bit more, we talk about the expected return from income and the appreciation of assets, the resources of the institution, which we talked about before, which is, can you afford outside consultants? Are each one of you making the decisions? Do you have a team, an investment committee that works together? That's one thing you need to think about. The need of the institution, again, we talk about the need for liquidity, the timing of investments, the timing of capital expenditures, and its impact on your ability to take illiquid investments. And whether or not, just an example again, many of the larger institutions like Harvard and Yale were widely reported to have to sell many of their private equity investments because they needed to fund their underlying capital expenditures, and they didn't have a lot of liquidity, so they had to go to market and sell at severe discounts in many cases. So that's something you need to think about when you're thinking about investing in illiquid assets and thinking about any investment in your portfolio. So duty to investigate. We talk about your duty of care, your duty of loyalty, your duty to investigate. And this is really talking about basic underlying due diligence. And I think if you look at what the Attorney General has asserted in the context of Merkin, which is one case that's very widely reported, one of the allegations was he didn't discharge or conduct reasonable due diligence into the underlying investments. I think there were, and in this context, he was talking about the investment with Madoff, which there were some basic red flags that should have been apparent to Mergen when he was doing his underlying due diligence in connection with Madoff. And I think from your perspective, if you're on the investment committee, I would look at that. I think it's fairly instructive to get a sense of some basic things that you should be sensitive to in connection with all of your due diligence. So you're talking about some of the things I think Doreen pointed out in the context of your organization, like separation of duties, is just as important when you're talking about investment due diligence. So if you're looking at an investment manager or a private fund, okay, and this private fund is very closely held and there are a few employees and there isn't a great deal of separation of duty and there aren't controls and checks, that should raise a red flag for you. If you've got family members that are in a position of all the senior positions of the organization, that should raise a red flag for you. If you're using lesser known service providers, and in the case of Madoff, they were talking about a 3-person accounting firm in a strip mall in New City, New York, that should raise a red flag. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything inherently wrong, but it might suggest that you should do further due diligence to find out the level of effort or integrity of oversight of some of these service providers in connection with the operations of the asset manager. So, I mean, I would look at the factors that were identified by Attorney General Cuomo in the complaint from Mergen as some basic red flags, some basic due diligence, some basic considerations that you should think about as part of the investment committee. Now, this is, I try to set things up in terms of your fiduciary responsibility, but now in terms of some practical tips on how to reflect the reasonableness taken by you on the investment committee. It's all about process. And the first thing in terms of creating a process, you have to educate yourself. And those that are on the investment committee should be sufficiently aware of financial principles in order to create an effective due diligence program, in order to create an effective supervisory program of outside consultants. You have to be educated, so you have to understand basic financial principles, okay? Rates of return, the interplay and correlation between fixed income and equity assets, non-alternative assets, whether it be real estate, private equity, or hedge funds. You have to be able to speak the language, okay, in order to create effective controls. You need to develop an asset allocation strategy. So we talk about, in part, some of the points here. You need to document your process. You need to create your asset allocation strategy, whether independently or with the help of a consultant, so there's something to monitor. Okay, and part of this is going back and reviewing each year the effectiveness of your program. So your asset allocation, strategy. What is, given your risk levels, given the need to grow the assets of the underlying organization, what should be your mix between fixed income assets, real estate, equity allocations, private equity funds, etc. And you need to document that. And then you need to think of what are your assumptions for the rates of growth for each of those asset classes. Given what's happened in the last 4 or 5 years, I think it would be prudent to go back and reevaluate your assumptions. We get that question all the time, which is, given what's happened in the market, we peaked in 13,000, a number of years ago, and then we came down to 7,000, we went back up to 11,000, we went back down to 7,000. Now we're 10,300 for the Dow, right? What should be a reasonable rate of growth for equity investments? I should go back and think about that. I should talk to my consultant that probably plugged in 8% based on historical analysis going back to 1930. But going forward, is 8% still a reasonable number? Or should that be 5%, or should that be 3%? Fixed income assets, that number is significantly less, but we've been in a low interest rate environment, so your rate of return on fixed income assets is substantially lower than what it's been. Well, it's not whether or not you're right, it's whether or not you think about it. It's whether or not you document the analysis. So if your committee meets and discusses whether or not that rate of growth is still appropriate, or they meet with the outside consultant to discuss whether or not that rate of growth is appropriate, document that you had that conversation with the consultant, so it reflects that you engaged in some level of supervision, you evaluated your process to judge its reasonableness. And the consultant might come back and say, you know what, it's been a really bad period, but historically it's been 8%. I'll show you what happened in the 1970s when we had stagflation and the market was a pretty difficult environment, but we came out of it in the 80s and the 90s and in the first part of this decade that we saw substantial growth. So that's my reasoning why I think we should still think that 8% as a rate of growth for equities is still a reasonable assumption, and that's why I'm not changing your overall allocation between fixed income and equity assets to generate whatever rate of growth is appropriate for your portfolio. Maintain your investment policy statement. The investment policy statement will include your asset allocation, but it might also include the type of factors that you think are appropriate to consider when allocating to third-party managers. I don't know whether or not some of you, I would think in many cases, you might select third-party institutional managers to manage your underlying portfolio. You'll enter into an investment management agreement with them. They'll have discretion over the assets. They have a particular investment strategy, okay? And you'll allocate among their strategies. Well, the investment policy statement would set forth the standards for hiring them. It set forth the standards for reviewing them. And it'll set forth reasonable performance expectations from them. So this gives you, when you have it down in writing now, and every year the investment committee is meeting, it basically sets forth a report card, all the factors that you should be thinking about, all of the factors that you should use to document your review of that underlying manager to support either termination of that manager, a reallocation from one manager to another manager, or the hiring of another strategy by that manager. So then you talk about implementing your investment strategy, which we've sort of alluded to. Monitoring and supervising the implementation of that investment strategy. Now, here, what I'd like to talk about are really the obligations of the board. When you hire a third-party manager or a consultant, the threshold question is whether or not you've given them discretion or you've not given them discretion. UPMIFA and even the New York statute permits you to delegate investment management functions to the discretionary selection of investments to a third party. Okay, they allow you to actually delegate to a third party. The question is whether or not you've effectively delegated that discretion to a third party. And if you've appropriately delegated that discretion and you're not responsible for the decisions made by that party, but provided the selection was reasonable and that you monitor them from time to time and the continued retention of them is reasonable, you're not responsible for those investment decisions. But you still must monitor them. You still must look at them every year to make sure they're doing what you think they're doing, to make sure that they haven't veered from their stated strategy, and that your continued retention of them is reasonable. What I think, many cases, smaller endowments use financial service firms. And I don't know, how many of you use financial service firms to assist in your function, in the investment function? I mean, we have one. Most of you just allocate directly to institutional managers. Do any of you invest in hedge funds? Anyone? No one wants to raise their hand to admit what they're doing? If you're using financial service firms, in many cases of using their wrap programs, they're non-discretionary. They're non-discretionary meaning they're going to provide you a number of options for you to consider, and you're going to select the investment choice. So in that case, you haven't delegated investment authority to that third party. You're still responsible for the investment decision. At the end of the day, the investment committee is going to be responsible for the reasons supporting making that decision. So if you invest in a mutual fund, you have to read the prospectus. You have to understand what they invest in. You have to understand the risk factors. If you invest in an underlying hedge fund, in many cases, the way hedge funds work, you get an offering document and you have a subscription document. Many times people use consultants who are going to assist them in selecting alternative investment vehicles, and then they'll walk in, they'll sit in front of the committee, and they'll give you the subscription document and say, sign here. In most cases, that's non-discretionary. Most people think I've hired that consultant, they're making the decision to invest in the alternative investment vehicle, but that's not true. You've signed the subscription document, you've made that investment decision, you should be thinking, I need to review the underlying offering document. Okay, I should be meeting with the consultant to talk about their review of the underlying offering document. I need to be aware of the risks. I need to be aware of the investment strategies they use. I need to be aware of the instruments that they choose, so that if the fund suffers poor performance, I can show that I was aware. Okay, I understood the risks. You're not a guarantor of performance, but you must have a reasonable process to support your decisions. So go back, look at all of your agreements. Look at all of your consulting agreements, your investment advisory agreements, to see whether or not you've given discretion to the third party. The second thing to think about looking at those agreements are the standards of liability. Many of them have a very high threshold for liability. They may not be liable for anything short of fraud, bad faith, or gross negligence. Depending on the size of your organization, you might be in a position to negotiate more favorable terms for yourselves, so that you might be able to negotiate a negligence standard for the investment manager in the event they make poor decisions. So we talked about some of the factors to consider. We talked about being educated. We talked about supervising your process. And now we talk about evidence of your process. We talk about documentation. The committee should meet fairly frequently, I would recommend. I think it's the best practice if the committee meets at least quarterly. But the committee should also be sensitive to certain occurrences which might trigger an ad hoc review. One that it's not on the quarter, don't wait for the quarter. You had a manager that's blowing up. You should have a meeting immediately to discuss what you should do with that manager. And it's particularly relevant in the case of a private fund. Let's say you have performance on a private fund. A private fund may have a withdrawal on 45 days notice. Well, if you have a meeting on the 31st of March and the 30th of June, and on every quarter end, okay, September 30, December 31st, okay, meeting on that day, okay, and then deciding you're going to get out of that fund that's distressed, okay, isn't going to give you the ability to get out of that fund that quarter. You're going to have to wait a whole other quarter, okay, to see whether or not that manager bounces back, whether or not they continue to blow up. So if you see your performance, your consultants generating reports, they're sending it to you on a monthly basis, or whether or not they send it to you by email, hey, check this out, watching this, manager, focus on distressed debt, really tough market, call a meeting and decide what to do immediately. But be sensitive to the requirement to have an ad hoc meeting. Okay, just don't think we have these regularly scheduled meetings and we should just continue down that path. But have your meetings and document your meetings. Because we talk about the ability to support the reasonableness of your process. Document some of the questions. Oftentimes you'll have a meeting and a manager may not be selected that quarter because there might be some concerns. As Doreen pointed out, in the case of the nonprofit, you should do background checks. In the case of a private fund, you may also do background checks. In the case of a private fund, you may be looking at the performance. Issues are going to come up. And if there's a delay in making an investment because someone raised their hand and said, I'd like to follow this manager for another 6 months to see how they perform, or I'd like to see how they correlate to the rest of the managers in their space, or I'd like to see how they correlate to the overall market, document that. Because it's helpful to show that you understand financial principles. You don't have to write it verbatim. I'm not a big believer of, the minute should be a transcript of the entire meeting, but I think you should highlight some of the key questions that were asked, who asked those questions, how methodical the committee was, and what the outcome was. And it's especially helpful if you decided to delay investment for certain reasons to highlight, so that the next time you have your meeting, when the consultant comes in or the committee meets, if they've addressed those issues, you can go back and then compare, say, well, we raised these issues on March 31st or the first week of April, and were these issues fully addressed? If they weren't fully addressed, well, you should send that person back again, whoever's making the investment selection or reviewing the investment, to say this wasn't covered. Go back and follow this. This was an issue raised by the committee and we're still concerned about it. So documentation is key. The last thing that I would point out, and then we can open up for questions, is, and this is one that I think most people probably don't do that often, is to have a process to review your process. You're never going to get everything right all the time, and you're not a guarantor of performance. But when something goes wrong, it's helpful to evaluate what could we have followed, what fact might we have uncovered that might have given us greater caution with that investment, or caused us to get out of that investment a little bit sooner, or caused us to reallocate among our portfolio a little bit more quickly. And I think that we're always striving for improvement. To the extent that when something goes really wrong, you look back and try to look within and evaluate perhaps something that the committee could do better next time. That's also very helpful. So with that, I don't know if Jeff has any additional comments, but we'll open it up for questions.
Let's open it up for questions now on for both Doreen and Rory. Anybody have any questions? Well, hearing none, I just want, yes.
I'm not going to ask really a question, but I'm right in the process of reinvesting in a endowment fund. We just came up with an investment policy and put out an RFP to banks to manage the small endowment that we do have. And I was I was curious about your comments on having what role the investment policy plays now, once we make a decision to go with a particular investment strategy. What process would you put in place to keep that a living and breathing document within the organization? So it's going to change. The asset allocation that we put out in our RFP is going to be different than what the selected fund.
Well, I think first of all, your document should say how often you should review the underlying managers. Okay, so to the extent that might say quarterly, I would say that, you take, all the factors that you've laid out in your investment policy statement as to how you're going to analyze those managers. Okay, and each quarter you should be, doing a side-by-side comparison and filling in the blanks for that manager. That's one way I think you're going to be responsible for adhering to the terms of that investment policy statement. So be fully aware of it. I think every year it is useful to go back and review the investment policy statement, to review your allocation, to review the criteria that you might have had for selecting and terminating managers to see whether or not they were effective, to review some of your underlying assumptions.
Do you have a template, not really a template, a document that shows some of the questions that should be asked? Because we're not investment experts, we're going to rely heavily on.
I didn't want to get into so much of the detail, but in the back, I put a number of operational due diligence type questions to ask if you're doing due diligence on the underlying managers.
Yeah, there's more of Rory's presentation that we didn't have time and on purpose didn't have time to get into it during the session, but if you flip through in the PowerPoint presentation, you'll find another 5 to 10 slides or so with a lot more additional information. And that also, I want to give you a good resource, not just for the materials about today's presentation, and a PDF, an electronic version of that entire handout book. If you want to share it with others electronically, it'll be posted on our firm's website shortly, certainly by the end of this week. And I want to give you a link to what's, I think, a very helpful resource for nonprofits. On our website, we have about 500 different articles and PowerPoint presentations on every major nonprofit legal topic that you can imagine, searchable by topic area. And we're constantly adding new documents, new articles, presentations to that collection. So if you want to write down this link, it's pretty easy to remember. www.venable.com, that's venable.com/nonprofits/publications. Venable.com/nonprofits/publications. Feel free to take a look at that to get more information, background on these topics, and like I said, every other major nonprofit legal topic that you can think of. So with that, I want to thank Rory and Doreen very much for a great job. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. It was really very enlightening and interesting and helpful. And thank you all for joining us today. Don't forget to fill in your evaluation forms, please. Thank you so much.